Happy Monday, 4B. Happy Monday. Oh, I'm sure you guys are feeling the same way that you cannot brain today. You has to dumb. But we will make it through. We've just got 2 more days, today and tomorrow, and then we have Thanksgiving break. Yay! So anyway, I'm sorry that I can't be here today. I have a doctor's appointment that I needed to go to, so I'm hoping that this will work again. Trying to go ahead and do this with the recording. Going through our lectures, and then we have a lab today. So we're just going to finish up with our notes, and then we're going to do that sensory lab. Hopefully you guys will enjoy yourselves. It's a pretty cool lab just to see how your sensory receptors work, basically. So let's go ahead and start off with our notes. You guys want to open up to page 46 in your notebooks. We're going to look at the different accessory structures found within the skin, and we're going to identify their different functions and a couple different things about their structure. So again, you guys want to go ahead and open up your notebooks to page 46, and that's where we'll go ahead and start with our notes. All right, so our first piece here is the hair follicle, and that's where we go ahead and we find this within the dermis. And the hair follicle is where cells start to go ahead and produce hair. It's where they originate. And also there's keratinization happening here, just like it happens within the skin. Keratin, remember, is a protein that helps harden the cells of the skin and also the cells of the hair as well as the nails. And so there's a bundle of smooth muscle that's attached to the hair follicle that's used to go ahead and give us goosebumps. We call this muscle the erector pili muscle, and when it contracts, it goes ahead and raises the hair follicle so that we get a goosebump, and it helps us actually keep our temperature up. So the hair follicle is where the cells go ahead and originate for hair. Keratinization happens here, and there's that bundle of smooth muscle fiber that's going to go ahead and give us goosebumps when we get cold. Also within the hair follicle, we find that the cells have the same pigment, melanin, as our skin does to go ahead and give our hair color. So if you have really, really light hair, you're going to have fewer pigments of melanin or smaller granules of it. And if you have gray hair, you're having even less of that pigment, so your melanocytes are producing less, and then once someone goes ahead and has white hair, they have no production of melanin at all. So melanin is just the same pigment that we find within our skin, just going ahead and giving us hair color this time instead. So remember, you want to try and shorten this up as much as you can when you're doing the notes, especially the number 3 there. Try and shorten that up. Just the erector pili muscle, smooth muscle, gives goosebumps. Maybe you could just put that. Okay, our next one. This here shows our hair follicle, and this is where the cell division is occurring, just like within the epithelial tissue here in the epidermis. We see that lowest layer is going to be the one that's reproducing new cells, just like here in the hair follicle. And then as they go up, they're going to become keratinized, getting more of that protein keratin to harden them. And they're also going to be going ahead and getting melanocytes, giving them melanin pigments all the way down here and pushing up to give us a hair. Okay, that next one is the sebaceous glands. Those are going to share a pore with the hair follicle. And so if we actually, I'll go back here in a second. If we look here, this sebaceous gland, we see that it's connected right there with the hair follicle, and whatever it's secreting is going to be going right onto the hair. So with the sebaceous gland, it's secreting oil or sebum, and that keeps our hair and our skin soft as well as waterproof. So whenever we take a shower, water doesn't just immediately seep into our hair, right? It actually, it washes off. It gets the outside wet, but doesn't go all the way through. So that waterproofing, that's a really important piece there for that secretion of the oil sebum. So the sebaceous glands are connected with the hair follicle pore, and they go ahead and secrete that oil to keep our skin and our hair soft and waterproof. Okay, so our next piece here are nails. So remember, these are all the accessory structures of the skin. They help make up the entire integumentary system. So don't just think that the integumentary system is just those 3 layers or just the skin. It also includes things like the nails and the hair and the glands. So with our nails, that first one, you don't need to write every single thing down there. It's just saying, okay, this is a protective covering at the ends of our fingers and toes. That's it. Now, it's produced by epidermal cells, which makes sense, right, because it's from the epidermis. And the nails also, of course, are going to be keratinized. They're going to be much harder, much more keratin, a lot more of the protein keratin within your nails, just because, of course, they're way harder than your skin. So our nails are a protective covering. And it's by the epidermal cells that they're going to go ahead and be produced. And they have a lot of keratin in them, way more than our skin or even our hair, so that our nails are really hard. Okay, so if you need to come back to the slide, just let the teacher know, okay? All right, so the next one is just a little, I don't want you to write all of this down. I just want us to go ahead and take a look here and see, okay, the nail is made up of 3 parts. You have the lunula, the nail bed, and then the nail plate. So the plate is the part that we actually are feeling, that we can feel, right? And the nail bed is right underneath there, so if you like tear a nail, which is terrible, the nail bed, that's the one that's going to be that exposed skin right there. So the lunula, and I want you to write this down, just this section right here. The lunula is the most actively growing region of the nail. So make sure that you write that part down. You can do it just off to the side of C. Just put lunula, most active growing region or section of the nail, okay? So you can kind of guess that, of course, that little moon shape there, that's where our cells are going to be producing the nail. And then the rest of it is just those keratinized dead epidermal cells. Now, one of the things that I think is kind of cool here with our nails is to think about the connection that we have with other mammals, and that's, you know, the hooves are the same as our nails on cows and horses and those kind of things, and then also the claws on like rats or on lizards or birds or any of those kind of things. They're the same type of material, same keratinized epidermal cells there. So just make sure that you wrote down the lunula is the most actively growing region of the nail. All right, so the sweat glands. These are there to go ahead and help us cool off as well as excrete waste products. So we've talked about that before. You know, of course, we urinate, and that would be one way that we go ahead and excrete waste from our body. But we also excrete waste when we sweat, which is kind of crazy. So you also are going to find urea within your sweat, which is gross, which is why you need to take a shower on a fairly regular basis, because you are actually producing waste on your own skin. So there are 2 different types of sweat glands. The first one we have is the eccrine or merocrine sweat glands. So we have 2 names for that, eccrine or merocrine. And these sweat glands go ahead and respond to elevated body temperatures. So if you're getting super, super hot, you know that you are going to go ahead and sweat. And one of the reasons for that is when we have water or sweat on our skin, it goes ahead and it increases the amount of evaporation of heat from our body. So it helps cool us off, which is also one of the reasons that when you get cold, you're not going to sweat. You don't want to sweat. You don't want to get wet, because it's going to go ahead and cool your core body temperature down. So the eccrine or the merocrine sweat glands, they respond to when you get really hot to go ahead and help you cool down. Now the second type of sweat gland that we find within the skin is the apocrine sweat glands. And they go ahead and they respond to emotional stress. So when you hit middle school and puberty, this is the one that went ahead and started to get active, more active, and you started to smell absolutely awful, and you had to start wearing deodorant, right? So the apocrine sweat glands, they're the ones responsible for that. They respond to when we start to have major changes emotionally and so we go ahead and we sweat, and that smells really bad. So one of the ways that you can remember the apocrine sweat glands are the absolutely awful adolescent odor. Okay, so the apocrine for absolutely awful adolescent odor. So there are two sweat glands. They're for cooling and excreting waste. The eccrine, or American sweat gland, to respond to elevated body temperature, and the apocrine sweat glands to respond to emotional stress. So we can see here the apocrine sweat gland right down here in the hypodermis, and the eccrine, or the American sweat gland, is going to be there in the dermis. And the apocrine sweat gland is actually also attached there to our hair follicle or pore there, versus the eccrine sweat gland, which is just sweating, is there in its own pore. And we can see that again, the apocrine sweat gland down here in the hypodermis connected to the hair follicle, and it's going to go ahead and excrete waste out through that pore, and then the American sweat gland is there within the dermis, having its own pore or own sweat pore there. All right, so you guys want to turn your page over. So we're going to talk about the regulation of body temperature. So we talked about this before when we were talking about the dermis, and we said, okay, if our temperature gets really high, our blood vessels are going to go ahead and they're going to dilate, and that's going to increase the amount of blood flow to the surface of our skin, so that we can have that that heat within us will go ahead and leave our body much more quickly, because we have all that blood there at the surface, and it's just going to go ahead and diffuse out from our body. The American sweat glands are, of course, going to go ahead and produce sweat. They're going to secrete sweat to increase the amount of heat leaving from our body. And so that's when our body temperature rises. So we've kind of talked about that a little bit before. You just want to go ahead and do some notes on that. Vice versa, if our body temperature drops, those blood vessels in the dermis are going to go ahead and constrict. They're going to become smaller. And then our sweat glands are also going to stop sweating, producing sweat, because that's going to increase heat loss, and we don't want to do that. So our blood vessels are going to constrict. That's going to reduce the amount of blood flow to the surface of our skin, which is also going to conserve the heat within the core of our body. If, for instance, you're outside when it's really, really cold, like it was this weekend, what will start to happen is once you go ahead and you have too much heat loss and your body can't go ahead and just reduce heat loss, but also needs to produce heat, our skeletal muscles will just automatically start contracting. So we said that our skeletal muscles were voluntary, so we choose to move them. But when we go ahead and we have too much heat loss, our body is going to automatically, involuntarily, make our skeletal muscles start to contract. And what that does is that produces heat for us. So we shiver, right? So when you're shivering, your body is literally attempting to go ahead and produce more heat to warm your body up. So when we get a fever, what's happening there, you notice you might actually be starting to shiver, but you're burning up. So fever is an elevated temperature. Our body has literally reset the thermostat within us, just like when you reset the thermostat in your own house. Let's say during the summertime you guys have it down to 65 because you like it really cold in the house. When it gets to winter, though, you turn it up to 70 degrees, let's say, or maybe 72 degrees, whatever it is. And so you've literally changed the set point in your house. And so our body does the exact same thing when we go ahead and we get a fever. Our body resets the temperature. So normally we're at 98.7, 98.8, somewhere around there. That's our set point. But when we get a cold or we get a viral infection or a bacterial infection, any of those kind of things, our body responds by increasing the temperature sometimes. And we do that, and I'm guessing you can guess, because we are going to go ahead and have a better chance of killing off the bacteria or the virus with a higher temperature within the body. So our body kind of plays Russian roulette because we can't withstand too much of 103 degree temperature within our body. But it also might kill the virus that our body is trying to get rid of. That could potentially kill us as well. So it's kind of this back and forth play of, okay, can we kill the virus before we kill ourselves kind of thing. So just remember, fever is actually just our body resetting our temperature. So if we're shivering, that's because our body is attempting to increase our body temperature to like 102 or 100 degrees, whatever it is, and then we're going to go ahead and shiver to try and get up to that new set point. Just like when your heat comes on in your house, when you turn it up to 72 degrees for the thermostat and that new set point. All right, so our last little piece here, healing of wounds. When we go ahead and we get a cut, a little tiny cut, you know, let's say if you have like a paper cut or you just scrape up against something and there's not really any blood or any of those kind of things, all that's going to happen is our epithelial cells are going to go ahead and start reproducing more cells to fill in that shallow cut. So there will be a reaction, a stimulus there from the cut, and our body will go ahead and respond by producing more epithelial cells. So that's for really tiny cuts. Okay, so they just become more active and they produce more cells to go ahead and fill in that little cut. If we get a deeper cut within the dermis, we know we're going to have blood that's going to fill into that area, and what's going to form is a blood clot. So blood clots are coming from platelets and all those other little pieces that are within the blood, and they're going to fill in that piece there to try and plug the hole basically, and sometimes of course that's going to leave a scar. So granulations form as part of the healing process, which is one of those things that's we're going to go ahead and see making that scar. So I have some pictures here that'll help give us a visual for how healing of wounds works, and those granulations, the fibers, and the blood clot and all those deals that affect that deeper cut. I just want to make sure everyone has enough time to write down the notes for healing of wounds, and then we'll go ahead and move on. Okay, so some pictures. We see here, this is where we have a deeper cut. So it's not just a little tiny one on the epidermis, it's actually all the way into the dermis. And we see our blood cells are starting to fill that in. And what's going to happen is those are going to be blocked up. The platelets are going to start to go ahead and block all of that off to stop the bleeding there. And we'll find then that we might have a scab. So this is the scab starting to form. The next piece is all the way down here in the dermis. The fibroblasts are going to start to produce more of the collagen and elastic fibers. So these are all just fibers. They're not cells. The fibroblasts are the cells, and they're going to go ahead and produce all of those different fibers. And that's actually going to go ahead and be seen a little bit here within the scar tissue. So this is just, that's all just dead blood cells. Blood and platelets, blood cells and platelets, and maybe some white cells that were there for fighting off infection and those kind of things. And so once we go ahead and heal up, that scab's just going to come right off. All right, so that's the last of our notes. We do have our test after Thanksgiving break. So we're going to go ahead and do a lab to help us understand the senses just a little bit more. I'm going to take a break just to set up all of the things that you need to actually start this lab.